You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Karasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 2, Chapter 13 of Vasily Grossman's life and fate, returning again to Derensky at Army Headquarters, which is now deployed along the southeastern front of the southeastern flank of the Stalingrad front. And Derensky goes and has, a boys' night with his friend Lieutenant Colonel Bova. They talk about classic boys' night things, drinking. Derensky shows himself as the ultimate women respecter by saying there's not water everywhere, but there's always women everywhere, which I'm not certain ecologically speaking is true, but that's neither here nor there. And then Bova passes out because of the drinking, wakes up later in the night, and they have an interesting discussion on the nature of the state, bureaucracy, their own society, all these fun things, and feel freer for it. Is there anywhere in this ranging conversation you'd like to begin? I mean, I imagine you really want to start with Derensky's apparently fuckboy tendencies.
I was mostly going to gloss over that, honestly, because I didn't think it was that interesting.
No, there's nothing to say about it other than
I liked Bova's Irish goodbye. Quite frankly, I thought that was good, and yeah, this conversation kind of that's nestled in like the last 3 pages of the chapter, I thought was the most interesting for me. Maybe the most,
sure.
what would you say, like the most relevant to some of the conversations that we've been having lately on the show.
Yes.
Not to say that the other parts aren't as interesting, but there is something about this conversation that is maybe a little bit new to some of the things that we've been talking about. And one of those is that we have this kind of class distinction between Derensky and Bova. As as is sort of discussed in this chapter, Derensky is the son of two aristocratic sides of his family. He's kind of born into this and in some ways resentful of it, and it has made his life a little bit more difficult despite the fact that he buys into the system and what he's doing. And Bova is the through and through peasant, as he describes himself. And they are arguing, the very simple way to put it, on what the state should be doing, what it should have the power to do. And I think the kind of conclusion is, despite the fact that they don't necessarily 100% agree, it's a rare example in the book of a sort of open and honest conversation that they're both grateful to have had. And there's not that many conversations where people walk away grateful to have had them in this novel.
Right. Yeah. Even among friends, expressing yourself
especially
really
among friends.
Yeah, is sort of a frightening moment, and even all the more interesting for the fact that they don't agree and do come from such different backgrounds, and yet still have this moment of human connection. All the more powerful that more than agreement among friends is a powerful moment for many people in this novel, among a trusted friend, but disagreement among friends or acquaintances even, I think, is in some ways even more powerful.
Yeah, and the conversation is interesting because Derensky is pointing out some good points, some things that we have talked about so far on the show, and the way that the state will sort of express power. And Bova is kind of like, I don't really care if they're going to go after former aristocrats. I'm just wondering, why did they come after me? Right. It's kind of humorous, really, looking at parts of the conversation. And Derensky has this conclusion where he says that what's really terrifying is when you realize that bureaucracy isn't simply a growth on the body of the state. If it were only that, it could be cut off. No, bureaucracy is the very essence of the state. And I don't know about you, if you had a real clear, concise explanation as to what they mean by bureaucracy, because I thought, to me, it sort of seemed like they were using it in a variety of different ways, whatever was kind of suiting where they were going at that particular moment.
I think, yeah, I don't know if they have a specific definition of bureaucracy. I think the strongest sense I would have is when we say bureaucracy, we mean like because they don't refer to the army itself as bureaucracy. They kind of talk about, I know here they talk about bureaucracy as essential to the state itself, but they're like, yeah, bureaucratism is ruining the army. So obviously it's not just a matter of organizations itself, the mere fact of a bureaucratic system. But it seems to me, at least I read it as bureaucracy being this sort of attitude where you can't help anyone. You have to be given orders. Everything has to be signed off on, right? You can't have your own initiative. And maybe that gets to the core of it, this kind of lacking of individual initiative. And I don't think they'd use these terminologies because it's very individualistic terminology, let's say, to say that. But I think that's basically the core idea of we need to airdrop food to men. Okay, in their system, they're in the army. They'd say, okay, great, we will airdrop this food to our troops. Perfect, great. It's all working out. But the very fact that someone needs to sign for it, and well, of course, even if they are surrounded and can't sign for it, that's not an excuse. We still need someone to sign for it, and there's no way around the rules. I mean, to me, that's bureaucracy. I think what they mean when they're talking about the bureaucracy, this refusal to this obeisance to the rules, regardless of what the actual situation is.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that.
They're talking about when they're talking about the state, in which I assume they're not meaning the state, the idea of the state, but they're talking about the USSR in particular. I'm assuming that's what they're looking at across and saying that our society is built out of this sort of attitude at the moment.
Yeah, it's this sort of reluctance to, I don't know, almost do anything that's going to push the boundaries, push the rules, just this kind of blind obedience in some ways. And I don't know. I think when you get that combined with, it's maybe one thing when you're just talking about logistics, but it's a completely different thing when it starts to expand and encapsulate every possible area of society. And as we see here, it can be quite a destructive force. So
right,
Grossman says, Don't be a bureaucrat.
Don't be a bureaucrat. Show some initiative. But I think this discussion of the state will grow interesting, especially as we talk about the various dimensions, various ways of seeing the state. Not in this case, we've been talking about the state, I think specifically about the USSR, but in the coming chapters, we'll be talking a little bit more about the idea of the state, the place of the state itself. And I think these ideas, these conversations that are having had on the Red Army side and this will be one of the situations where the parallels start to show you some of those stark differences versus the way we were talking about the state in the German camps.
I can't wait. Everyone's been saying your podcast is too abstract, and finally we can talk to everybody about something more practical, down to earth, the idea of the state.
Well, we already have we have I'm sure we have more than a couple international relations students who have if you've been through IR 101, you already know the answer to that one. We knocked that one out pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember you've been drilled into your head?
No, no. I was trying to think of a better quip for anybody who was an international relations student listening to us. On how you should probably abandon hope. Switch majors.
That's the more important one. I was gonna follow through and follow through with the joke and give the actual definition of the state, but I think Matt's actually giving real advice here. Just take a better major.
Go to your Slavic department. Pick a real major in there.
What you really want to do is anthropology and just take a language on the side. Let's be honest.
All right, before we send you into crippling student loan debt.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a good place to leave it before we do that. So in that case, you will hear from us again soon.